My father had just died, I thought to myself as I left the funeral. Why would I think this to myself? I find those who have lost a loved one may understand there are those moments before a funeral where you think, this is all just a dream. You think, oh, I'm gonna wake up, and he'd still be there in his study, looking at his old hieroglyphics he discovered during his days as an archaeologist and professor. As for me, I was never interested. I had my own ideas, wanting to be a policeman. Looking back now, I should have listened to my father. If I had, I may have stopped this journey right here and now before I discovered what it is that I am about to. It is 2002 and my father had been dead a week. The funeral was hard to process. A bunch of people there I never knew, people who knew my father professionally. They had come to pay their respects. I could not deny them. I was then approached by an elderly gentleman by the name of Professor Samuel Godwin. He offered his condolences and asked me of my father's research. They were discussing it the same day he died. Hard to believe a man screaming in terror, repeating the same gibberish repeatedly before dying of a fatal heart attack, and having a sane conversation with a colleague only hours before. If I did not know any better, I would have said he was scared to death. Professor Samuel Godwin asked me if he could have my father's research. I agreed to let him have it. I had no use for it. I did study archaeology, and Dad often told me about his research. It seemed very dark, according to him. Well, it was enough to scare me away from his line of work. Mythology, gods that could destroy civilisations, gave me nightmares as a child. In the end, they were just children's stories. As I looked through my father's research, I found that what he was researching was far more terrifying than I thought, for it was more than just a mere discovery. It was connected to my family. My ancestor, Jedediah, died November 17th, 1866, in an insane asylum. He too screamed gibberish and died from a fatal heart attack. As I continued through my dad's papers, all I could think was how glad I would be to get rid of it. Why would my father research something involving an ancient relative? What was he trying to prove? I then found something I had not seen before, an old journal by my ancestor Jedediah. This journal had everything from when he and his wife Elizabeth settled in a Colorado mining town in 1862 called Minerton. Right between Cheyenne and Arapaho. According to Jedediah, it was quite a wealthy town. Gold and silver were mined every day. There was plenty of work to go around. It was a beautiful community. Could you imagine life back then? Mining for gold and silver, acquiring real value that never drops, and having fires and camp songs every night with a beer in your hand. Could you imagine life back then? Mining for gold and silver, acquiring real value that never drops, and having fires and camp songs every night with a beer in your hand. Would have been a great life, unlike the stressful, rushed life in the big cities today, working for paper money that loses value every time the government decides. As I read further, I found the good times were not to last, as Minerton was stuck in the crossfire of the Colorado War in 1864. The Cheyenne Nation and the Arapaho Nation were at war. For the most part, Minerton seemed to stay out of the war until the retaliation of the Sand Creek Massacre of 1864. In early 1865, Minerton was attacked by allying Native American tribes. The men, including Jedediah, stayed to defend, to buy time for the women and children to escape. A lot of men died that day. It was another massacre. Minerton had nothing to do with what happened at Sand Creek, but that did not stop the Native Americans acting out their fury. Of course, did not stop men like Jedediah from fighting for the place they called home, or his pregnant wife. If she had not escaped, I never would have been born. As I read on, Jedediah explained how his fellow countrymen were dying like flies. Sure, they had the better weaponry. However, the Native Americans had the numbers and a common goal. Soon, Jedediah was the last man standing. He lured the Native Americans into the mountain mine, where a trap was set, should the mine fall into the hands of a hostile enemy. As they followed my ancestor in, Jedediah lit a fuse and blew the whole mine and those Native Americans to kingdom come. His words, not mine. He too was trapped, but alive. The next thing he remembered was being in a tunnel with water running along it. The tunnel was not something he or the other townspeople had mined. He looked up, found a big hole in the ceiling, most likely where he came from. He began walking it. There seemed to be a faint light source, not very bright in the distance, but enough that Jedediah could see. He had found some hieroglyphics. I guess when he was found, he had managed to scribble some. I recognized them from my father's photographs of the same hieroglyphics in his research. Could it be he went to Minerton and found that tunnel? He never said anything. I had to read on. These are his words. As I walked down this mysterious tunnel, I realized this may have been here for centuries. The texture was smooth, crafted by a master craftsman. I believe this will stand until the end of time. Still, I feared I should not be there. I felt fear, the darkness around me. It is overwhelming. I think I would rather be fighting Indians than have been trapped in that place. After the things I saw next, I can tell you, I was right. Forget what these doctors try to tell me. I saw what I saw. Down there, those moments are as real as my final moments now. I will not be able to hold back the horror of what I saw much longer. Soon, it will overcome me and my life will end. My only hope is that my story will warn someone before someone else goes looking for it. I kept walking the tunnel. The further I walked, it was like a living presence was all around, watching me. As I looked around, I was all alone. I cannot tell you how long I was down there, wandering. It could have been weeks for all I knew. Suddenly I heard something. A voice at first. I was relieved. I thought maybe someone else was down here. They could show me the way home. However, the more I heard the voice, the more it terrified me. I couldn't understand the words. It was all I kept hearing. Even the voice didn't sound right. It was foul, like the energy in the air. I did not want to go on. Why I went, I cannot say for sure. I do not know if it was by my will or by the will of someone or something else. I then found myself what looked to be another world, a dark world. Beyond the tunnel, a civilization hidden under our world. I could hardly comprehend it. I honestly thought I had died and gone to hell. It was dark and terrifying, but interesting. I began moving about the city. The buildings were old, like the Mayan civilization, but not quite the same. As I ventured further, I heard that same voice again, repeating the very same chant. This time, it was much louder. I looked around, my gun drawn. I looked above. I could not see any rock. What I saw terrified me more. A night sky and a moon. Am I out of the cave? Or have I truly ventured into another world? At that moment, I accepted the truth. I was going to die in this place. There was no going home. This was the price I would have to pay for the men and women I killed today. It suited me fine knowing my wife and soon-to-be-born child would survive. First time I smiled in days, I decided to enjoy the moment. I sat by a lighted lamp and smoked our cigarettes. Suddenly, I was startled by a figure in the distance. It was pitch black and wavy. I opened fire and it looked like the bullet passed right through it. It seemed to fly away into the darkness from whence it came. Suddenly, an agonizing pain came over me from my ears. It was that voice again, but louder. It could make anyone deaf. I crunched up like a bug and covering my ears as hard as I could. But then came to a terrifying realization. I could still hear that voice, loud and clear, even with the hands covering my ears. It was then I realized that voice was in my mind, tormenting me. "What do you want from me?" I yelled. Suddenly, I hear a loud screech sound, like the ones my mother used to say came from scary monsters in the stories she used to tell me as a kid. I got to my feet and some sort of monster was running at me. It had a bat-like face, long hair, and a pale human-like body. It almost glowed in the dark. All I could do was shoot at it. I fired 2 shots and killed the creature. At least I think I did. I was running in the other direction. The place was hard to make out, in the darkness, even with the torch I took from what looked to be the catacombs. I followed it through. There was nowhere else to go. I saw what looked to be human skeletons. Either that, or maybe that creature may have been human once. This might be what happens to humans if they are down here too long. I had no time to question. I just kept running, hoping to finally reach the end of this journey. Eventually, I made it to the other side. I could see more of the world, more of this ancient-looking city. I could see what looked like mountains stretching all over. You cannot see the end. I decided to go for it. I would follow the mountain path and take my chances. Maybe I will find another tunnel leading me home. I walked cautiously but did not see any more creatures. I did not understand. This was the opening. I would have thought there would have been creatures lying in wait. Or maybe the creatures in the city, if they were once human like me, never made it this far. This place is like a maze. Still, I felt that something was guiding me to this place, guiding me to wherever I am going now. The higher I climbed, only seeing more mountain and that almost pitch black sky, I began to wonder if there was any end to it. Still, I pushed forward. Even though I wanted to drop, something kept me going. If I only knew what that something was, I may have turned back and let those humanoid bat-head creatures eat me alive. But what happened next would change me forever as I came across a structure at the top of the mountain. It was like an ancient shrine, filled with hieroglyphics. I walked through to the outside balcony. I could not see anything, just the moon and the dark sky reflecting above. Black, seemingly endless ocean. I stared out for a while. I could not believe I was trapped in this godforsaken world. Suddenly, I fell to my knees again. That voice, that pure, evil voice entered my head again, chanting, this time saying words I just can't pronounce. Repeatedly, I heard this every time, faster and faster. It was maddening. Then the moon faded away into darkness, like an eye slowly closing. I felt a chill, which was weird, because there was no wind. I saw what seemed to be a storm cloud. I was terrified. It was moving fast and getting bigger. The cloud seemed to be touching the water. I could hear what sounded like movement in the water. Something big, huge. As the cloud got closer, I soon realized this was no cloud. It was a monster. I saw its legs. They were like spiders, and there were 4. It had a human-like body and a lion's mane hair. Its face was the stuff of nightmares. Bright leering eyes, huge fangs, and Y-shaped mark down the left side of its face. I was frozen stiff with fear as I stared at this entity of darkness. It stared back at me for what seemed to be an eternity. Suddenly, it came for me, charged at me. I could not do anything. I could not even scream. I was so terrified I blacked out. When I finally came to, I was back in a town emergency ward. Apparently, I was found atop of the rubble, closing off the mine entrance from the explosion I caused. Now that you know my tale, I must remind you, whether you're my future descendant or someone who finds this journal, I must ask, don't go looking for that tunnel or the creature I have come to know as Rawlurah.